So the second lecture will start with the euphoria of independence of Kenya. And it will look at the complications that existed with this young nation. It will explore the divisions that existed at that time. It will also look at some of the ideas of how best to establish an independent nation. It will look into great ideas. For example, wandering leaders of the East African region willing to suspend and defer their independence, the independence of Tanganyika, the independence of Kenya, the independence of Uganda, and the independence of neighboring countries, so that they can have an opportunity to consolidate and start an East African federation. They were seeking to deconstruct the borders and the complications of the borders created through the Berlin Conference. They were seeking to have a larger community, a bigger nation that will be established based on the resources of the people and the resources of the land. They were also looking to implement a negotiated document called the Constitution. It will also tell the story of those who were not happy of the compromise that led to the Independence Constitution. It will also tell the story of those who did not want Kenya to continue as a dominion for a long period. Don't forget, Kenya got independence as a dominion of the British. We had a head of government, but the head of state remained the Queen. So people wanted to establish a republic fairly quickly. But because of the complications in East Africa, despite the efforts of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere and the other progressive politicians, each country took the path of their own independence and said, let us get independence, then we'll unite together. But this concept of an African integration, a Pan-African movement, will also be examined in view of progressive politicians and the different schools of thought concerning how to unite the continent of Africa. There were two main schools of thought. One that wanted an immediate unification of the whole African continent. This was led by Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, and he invested a great deal of resources from Ghana to fight for the independence of the other countries. And Kwame Nkrumah, in the speech of independence at midnight, after the Union Jack had been brought down, said that the Ghanaian independence will be meaningless as long as other African countries remain in the yoke of slavery and in the yoke of colonialism. He worked with people like Gamal Abdel Nasser from Misri or from Egypt and others to say we want unity now. So this episode will look into the whole question of these progressive forces. It will also look at the other school of thought that said, let us unite, but slowly and gradually. And this school of thought, you'll be surprised, was led by Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And it led to the formation of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. You will look at the politics of the holding of the first All-African Conference, chaired by a young, brilliant Kenyan, Tomboy, when he was in his 20s, and where you had heavyweight African politicians. But Mboya took a path that will lead into a great conflict in Kenya between forces that were looking east, forces that wanted to retain the vestiges of colonial power, and forces that wanted to bring revolution to Kenya. Forces that wanted to align with the capitalist West, and forces that wanted to establish a form of social justice or socialism in this land. And this led to great conflict. We will look at the ideological differences that led to the marginalization of certain politicians, the assassination of certain politicians, the detention without trial of certain politicians. And you will also be shocked to know the idea that you could do whatever you want once you became the masters of your own destiny was advised from Thurgood Marshall from the United States of America. An African-American man who was committed to activism and civil liberties and later became a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of America, was advising Africans that accept any deal, but after you become masters of your own, do whatever you please. This story will also look at how the euphoria of independence transformed to disappointment by the masses, by the people of Kenya, when they saw nothing was changing. It was nothing but a change of guard. Those who came after the British, the only difference was the color of their skin and their appetite for greed and exploitation. You will hear the story of freedom fighters who changed and became persecutors, who became tormentors of their own people. You would hear the justification of the unification of all political parties into one party and the beginning of the single-party dictatorship and the violations of rights. You will hear of the resistance of the people to change the colonial laws to be in harmony with the independence constitution. The penal code has more or less remained the same from colonial time to date. You will hear of the struggle of the Kenyan people to establish a non-aligned movement together with the other African countries as a response to a two-world created by the tensions between the East and the West. You'll also hear the attempts by foreign forces to co-opt and make nations such as Kenya a clientele nation, aligned in the context of Kenya into a war between the East and the West, and Kenya sided with the West and became predatory. And you will hear the complications arising from these political forces and how they affected the project of establishing the East African community, and how the East African community was circumvented and died and then revived again. You will hear about coups and the counter coups. You will hear about civil war outside Kenya. You would hear the story of how Kenya became a single-party dictatorship that violated the rights of citizens, and how citizens rose up to fight for the reintroduction of multipartyism, to fight for a new constitutional order. And this journey will trace us to the present and the present struggles that Kenyans are facing. That this story will continue to start imagining the future. And as part of this lecture series, discussions, people-centered town hall meetings, we will also meet young Kenyans who have taken up the mantle for resistance, for struggle, and are shaping the next phase of our struggles. And we shall also paint out possible futures for Kenya, so that Kenyans can start imagining what they need to do to shape a desirable future for themselves and bequeath the current generation and future generation a Kenya that everybody would be proud of. It is not right for me to finish this introduction without telling you a few expectations from us to you. We would like you, when you see the links that are created in this introduction, for you to find time and click on those links so that you can get more information about some of the things that we have discussed in this introduction. Click the links to videos, click the links to academic papers, click the links to some of the scholars that we have mentioned, so that you can prepare yourself to enter into a conversation and a discussion concerning these two lectures that we are preparing for you. The first lecture will cover the ancient world, the old world, and the disruption that followed, the conquest, the slave trade, the colonialism, and the fight for independence. And the second lecture will then take the story from when we got freedom. Some people will say freedom of the flag and the national anthem, to where we are now. And we will also be anticipating of stories yet to come. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and we look forward to the engagement in these two lectures that are coming. Thank you.